Hello, my name is Dominic Potts. I'm a research fellow at the University of the West of England, and I'll be presenting RetroSketch, a retrospective method for measuring emotions and presence in virtual reality, and this work was done in collaboration with my colleagues at the University of Bath. So VR games and experiences are successful when they elicit strong emotions from users and create a sense of presence in a virtual world. So for VR designers and researchers, it's important to understand the emotional components of the experience and sense of presence that users feel in these worlds. So how is this done typically? Well, the most common method is to employ some form of experience sampling methodology, or ESM, with the strength of ESM being that you capture feelings in their natural setting and moment that they occur. And while there are lots of specific methods for ESM, this is typically achieved through questionnaires and Likert scales. This is very much validated and serves as a gold standard for short and simple VR experiences, but what about longer, interactive and rich experiences like VR games? Well, in this context, ESM has several established limitations. ESM can be disruptive to the experience and induce an observer effect. ESM can be discrete and non-continuous, where more samples equals more disruptions, and you might miss key moments that were emotionally salient, for example. In light of these, might a different approach be more suitable? So to explore this, we developed RetroSketch, a retrospective emotion measurement tool using an interactive sketching application, where users watch back their gameplay and plot their emotions moment by moment. And we designed the tool with three design principles in mind. First, we wanted users to have an interactive timeline to explore their experience, how they see fit, and from the perspective that they experienced it from. Second, users mark the moments that were emotionally salient to them with key points and provide contextual annotations for those moments. And third, users plot their emotions and presence over time, providing a continuous measure of their emotions throughout the experience. And the resulting user sketches look something like this, with a complete graph for their experience: joy, fear, relaxation, boredom, and presence. So we wanted to understand how RetroSketch compared to current ESM approaches, and specifically we wanted to address 5 research questions. RQ1, how do RetroSketch measures relate to ESM measures? So if emotional recall with RetroSketch is a valid approach, we should expect to see strong correspondence with ESM. RQ2, how reliable are RetroSketch and ESM across different VR experiences and users? So do different user demographics such as age or personality type influence either RetroSketch or ESM differently? RQ3, how does ESM influence the VR user experience? If ESM can be disruptive, what is the actual consequence of these disruptions to the VR experience? RQ4, how do RetroSketch and ESM relate to physiological measures? So does either measure explain more of the variance in common physiological measures of emotion? And finally, RQ5, how do RetroSketch and ESM relate to qualitative measures? So do both measures align equally well with the sentiment of qualitative measures of the VR experience? For brevity, I'm just going to focus on RQ1 and RQ3, and I'll discuss those in detail. So to answer these questions, we designed a VR experiment with 140 participants following a mixed factorial design. We had one within subject factor, which was the use of ESM, and this had 2 levels, with either ESM being used or not being used. And then we had one between subject factor, which was the VR game, and this had 5 levels with 5 different VR games, so each participant only played one VR game. And so let's look at these games a little bit closer. They were very different VR experiences in terms of genre, mechanics, and themes. And we also had very different VR setups. So, for example, with Assetto Corsa here, we used a full haptic driving simulator. And the idea is that we wanted to stress test both measures across a wide range of VR games. We also captured 10 different physiological measures which we collected from a range of devices, and this allowed us to understand how both RetroSketch and ESM relate to underlying physiological changes. And the procedure looked a bit like this. So first, users were briefed on the study and completed some demographics. They were then introduced to both measurement methods and also given a tutorial on RetroSketch. We then took some calibration measures of their emotions and physiology, and then they completed a 10-minute tutorial of their selected VR game. Then they would go into a 30-minute gameplay session of free gameplay, and dependent on counterbalancing, they would be administered ESM sampling, which looked a bit like this. Please answer the following experience questions. On a scale of 0 to 10, how joyful do you feel?
7?
On a scale of 0 to 10, how relaxed do you feel?
4?
So those questions were administered at 5-minute intervals for the 5 emotions, so a total of 6 samples in 30-minute sessions. After the gameplay, participants exited VR, completed some post-condition measures, and then had their session with RetroSketch. This block was repeated again, but then with no experience sampling, but still using RetroSketch after the session. So, onto the results then. Well, for RQ1, we tested the correlations between RetroSketch and ESM using Kendall's tau, and we did this across all games. And in the table here, we can see that across all samples, there is a consistent, strong, and significant correlation across the 5 emotions. We also tested this for each ESM interval, so for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and so on, and the correlations were consistently significant and strong. We also found no significant interactions with the 5 VR games, meaning that in this case, the correlations appear to be robust across different experiences. In addition to this, we also analysed the distribution characteristics of each measure compared to one another. So we were specifically looking at the median, MAD, and range for each measure. This was due to non-normality, and we tested for differences using a line rank transform and over tests. And here we can see from the table that generally RetroSketch had higher variability in many of the measures, and this is shown by the significant results for the MAD values, and these had large effect sizes. And we can see much more peaks and troughs in specifically the joy ratings. And we had a slight tendency towards higher negative emotions and lower positive emotions when using RetroSketch. So now, to understand the influence that ESM is having on the VR experience, we captured a range of user experience measures after each session, so the session with ESM and the session without ESM. And we were considering things like intrinsic motivation and flow. And overall, there's some small but significant differences between using ESM and not using ESM across all 5 VR games, but the story becomes a bit more interesting when you consider each VR game in isolation. So let's look at one measure in particular, and this is the experience pressure for over all the games, and using ESM results in a small amount of added pressure. And this was the same story for Assetto Corsa, where we see a larger effect in the same direction. The story was the same for Gone in the Sea. But then strangely for Half-Life Alyx, an intense action horror shooter, the pressure actually goes down. We see the complete inverse effect. And likewise for I Expect You to Die, with intense life or death puzzles, the pressure also goes down as well. And then for Red Matter, a sort of open exploration narrative game, using ESM results once again in an increase in pressure. So what's going on here? Well, we observed that during Half-Life Alyx and I Expect You to Die, the ESM sampling would sometimes be used as an artificial break for the participants, where they would take the opportunity to stop what they were doing and answer the questions, breaking up the intensity of these two experiences. But in the other experiences, where we saw a pressure increase, participants felt comfortable enough to progress and complete the sampling at the same time. So the takeaway here is that ESM does in fact influence the VR experience, but in many small yet unpredictable ways that are contingent on the VR experience. And sometimes the effect can be larger. For example, in Red Matter we see a slightly larger effect for more measures compared to the other games. This was just a snapshot and just scratches the surface of the results, but please refer to the paper for more details. So having looked at all of these research questions and our validation study of RetroSketch, we distilled our results into 10 recommendations, and I'll just highlight 3 of them here. RetroSketch is more suitable than ESM for capturing continuous data at high resolution. However, if this is not required, then consider the ease and simplicity of ESM instead. Be careful when using RetroSketch for experiences longer than 30 minutes, because the time required for retrospection increases with the duration of the experience, and we've not yet explored the limits of RetroSketch. And 3, allow users the freedom to use RetroSketch as they see fit. There are lots of avenues for future work, but we see 2 promising directions in particular: exploring the generalizability of RetroSketch to contexts outside of VR gaming, as well as testing how scalable the tool is to shorter or longer experiences. The tool can be used to also understand emotional recall and appraisal further. And we hope to get other researchers started on future work. We have obviously concrete guidelines for using RetroSketch, but we also have an extended analysis report, an aggregated dataset in supplementary material, as well as a more complete dataset which is available on our research data archive. And we've also made the digital version of RetroSketch available on GitHub. And with that, I thank you for your attention.